Hello, I'm your host, Ray Dogum, and welcome to VibeCast. Thank you for joining us as we explore the exciting advancements in technology-enabled collaboration to excel in important drug development. VibeBio seeks to find every cure for every community. We think big, as no one should be left behind in the pursuit of living a healthy, happy, and productive life free from disease. Collectively, we have the skills, we have the technology, and we have the passion. We now need the community catalyst to bring that all together. That's Vibe. We see a future where communities of biopharma experts and patients collaborate to identify high potential medicines and have the ability to access capital on demand to actually develop them. The VibeCast is our weekly informational podcast where we explore some of the hottest topics in drug development and technology innovation with some of the dynamic people that make up the Vibe community. Join us to learn, imagine, question, and help us identify and develop solutions together. Our guest today is none other than Brigitte Piniewski, MD. Brigitte, thank you for joining me today. Why don't you tell the community and audience a little bit more about yourself and your background, and then we can dive into your presentation on the future of health.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Happy to be here. Excited to chat with you. So as you mentioned, I'm a physician by trade. I've spent many years in frontline medicine, began with emphasis on maternity, so doing the prenatal, the natal, the postnatal care, and then eventually moved into more medical administration as chief medical officer for one of the largest reference labs in the Pacific Northwest. And there we did more and more using technology to enable the smart household and the smart home, which brought me into an opportunity to help investors as they look to invest in the future of healthcare, determining what was a viable investment or not. And more startups were bringing blockchain-based solutions to our teams. And I recognized that both myself and the investors needed an education in blockchain, since we had not trained in this technology and certainly not worked with it previously. And unless investors understand a technology, they're less likely to invest. And so that launched me into a small career of providing blockchain and Web3 education for investors. And more recently, I have put in the time to put together a 101 for those folks interested in understanding why this really matters today. And that's why I'm excited to speak about this with you, Ray.
That's so exciting. I'm excited as well. And I think it's quite interesting because there have been so many Web3 blockchain related startups that have come out in the last couple of years. So I'm sure you've been super busy trying to, wrap your head around Web3, as well as try to explain it to people who have sort of no idea. So I'm sure that challenge has been interesting, and you've learned a lot. So really curious to see what you have today.
Yeah, there's so many people that are behind what's in this book, because clearly it's not something that you can come up with by yourself. But what really made it so important to put this down on paper was the fact that there just isn't a really good narrative out there yet that helps diverse stakeholders understand why this matters now.
And can you repeat what the name of the book is, the title, and a little bit more detail about that? Just so the people that are listening in, because we will have some people on the audio only version. So we just want to make sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the book's called Wealthcare: Demystifying Web3 and the Rise of Personal Data Economies.
Excellent.
And then, as mentioned, the reason for the book is that we're really in need of a simple narrative that will take newcomers to the space, regardless of their professional or non-professional backgrounds, and allow them all to huddle around the same table and work together to build our preferred futures. And the way I begin in the book is to just really emphasize the fact that we're no longer accidentally well. And people wonder, what does that mean? And clearly it relates to the fact that older cohorts really did not have to pay too much attention to living. You could basically exist with relatively little data. You needed clean water, some food, and some shelter. But other than that, there was no need to have a lot of data with respect to how you were living your life. And what's happened over time with humans evolving in face of more and more technology every day in our lives, we're finding that the things our biology expected no longer exist. So for instance, a 24-hour photo period, lights don't go off at 8 anymore. You can leave the light on 24/7. And farm food has been replaced by factory food, and certainly movement. We clearly don't have to work for our food anymore. We can press a few buttons and it'll arrive at our door. And so the ability for technology to rearrange the conditions on the ground to such a significant degree is something that we have just sort of taken for granted, that that's not going to affect our biology. But as a physician, of course, you're seeing these patients on a regular basis, and they're having to teach you just how impactful these new conditions are. And for me especially, it was an incredible eye-opener, because having been in a pregnancy practice, I thought we just had to do those 9 months correctly, and we would be obviously launching all of our babies off to 100 years of good health. Just get the time in utero perfect, and then you're good to go. But what I really saw over time was that this was completely wrong, that especially young people during that very sensitive time of puberty, if they had the misfortune of having such altered conditions on the ground that we just mentioned, factory food, low mobility, changes in photo period, even, of course, our technology changes the way we socialize as well, that these kids have this very, biologically sensitive time called puberty. And if puberty is hormonally rearranged because of those conditions, that's a situation that is not retrievable. 4 years later, puberty is over. And there's really no medical fix for that. And so what I was seeing is young men, especially, having early onset, yes, physical changes, diabetes and obesity and all the challenges with that, but also on every domain of human functioning, social changes, their ability to socialize. These young men were not going for the big exam or the big relationship or the big job. They were hoping to sit quietly in front of a screen, hoping to bother no one, in the hopes that nobody would bother them. And so, this would drive their parents crazy, because they should be out looking for work. And yet what we see is a young man's future earning potential, social potential, vocational potential, all being impacted very dramatically in a short period of time, during which, of course, he nor his parents have any informed consent. Child's too young to know that this is going on. And then, of course, the parents often have no idea as well.
Are there any specific factors that are most impactful to the either young man or woman's hormones during this period? That, I guess I'm talking about environmental factors. You mentioned, our diet for sure has changed with factory farming, basically, and a lot of processed foods that we eat now. Everything's pretty much processed. I would also say the plastics in our water, in our environment, is probably also, a detrimental factor in this as well.
Yeah. So the underlying theme, of course, with what you're saying, Ray, is we do not know, and we have no business knowing so little today. I think from a medical perspective, it's clear that at least those young men that had adiposity, so adipose sites or fat cells, they carry an ability to create the hormone estrone. Estrone is very similar to estrogen. And so in a male type body where you're expecting a strong testosterone surge, even if there is normal testosterone levels, the receptors themselves don't distinguish that aggressively between one sex steroid and another. In other words, we only call the receptor a testosterone receptor if it binds more tightly to testosterone than estrogen or one of the others. But there's nothing stopping that receptor from picking up a non-testosterone hormone if that just happens to be handy, And so what we find is that these young men have very different physical makeup, mental and social makeup at the end of the day, which, as you mentioned, is not likely just due to adipocytes or fat cells. Probably the toxins in fertilizers, in the food chain, and in the air we breathe, et cetera, may also be contributing in some unknown way. But the bottom line is we are not alone. we have so many people on this planet that can help us sort out what's actually going on. And in fact, we as individuals are motivated to find out what this truth is. And we don't have any sort of financial business model stopping us the way other industries do. So enterprises, to some extent, are reluctant to find out what exactly is going on if that's going to interfere with the way in which they do business today. But fundamentally, we as individuals don't have those misaligned incentives. And so we do have an opportunity to look at a world where we rely on each other to teach us what is, in fact, the truths that matter. Because at the end of the day, there is no sort of freedom or liberty to choose your own future if you can't see what's coming up. And so I think we are looking now at a world where we are no longer accidentally well. We can't assume that we have good access to our genetic potential because of course, we have no new shipment of genes. What's going on today is happening with the same gene pool that our parents had and our grandparents had. The gene pool itself has not changed because it takes many centuries for that to happen. And so what we're seeing is that younger and younger generations, though, are faring less well with the same gene pool, and that failure to access the full potential of their genetic gene disposition is hampered by their inability to understand what's actually happening around the corner, where they're actually moving towards.
That's really interesting. And I'm thinking about like each individual probably has an ideal environment where they can reach their genetic potential, let's say. And that's probably different for each person. We probably haven't been able to identify those ideal environments. We're trying to, I think, in many ways through maybe clinical trials or just, documenting real world data and evidence and trying to make sense of all that population health information. But I think what your book is trying to do is talk about personal data economies to create this engine of incentivization to kind of peer-to-peer share the right data with each other so that we can all understand the population a little bit better over time as the technology gets better, as there's more diagnostic tools, et cetera. But before we dive into the economy, I just want to know, how did you first hear about blockchain technology?
Oh, as I mentioned, with the work that I was doing with investors, helping them with health tech, and then the startups would come up and show, oh, we're doing this using blockchain. And we're all going, okay. But this is way back. This is 2015, 2014, right? And so I spent some time since then figuring out exactly what they were talking about and saw finally that even though healthcare has been talking about patient-centered care or citizen-centric, health, that is something that we have PowerPoints and images around, but we don't have a tech stack that really supports that yet. It's very enterprise-centric, the tech stack itself. And not to say that that's wrong, because I think there's really good reasons why enterprises need to have a centralized model. But I think that for the first time in at least my career, I could see a solid path forward to a individual and patient-centric health future that is absolutely doable from a tech stack perspective.
That's awesome. Very cool. So let's talk about this data economy, the personal data economy, or maybe we can go to your next slide. What do you prefer?
Oh, I think just finish up on this one. Why?
Sure.
Because I think some of our audience don't really understand what Web3 is. And I thought I'd spend a couple minutes just going through Web 1, 2, and 3, just to level set for all of us. As we try to make sure in the book that this is something everybody can follow. You don't need to be a technologist or IT individual of any sort. So quickly, Web 1 is, of course, the World Wide Web, the first internet as it arrived in the early days. And as the name implies, World Wide Web, it was essentially the same for every single user. As long as you had an internet connection, it was showing information, you would have the same information. So ourselves here on this side of the planet, as well as other people on the other side of the planet, if they were looking up a certain page in an encyclopedia, it would be the same page for all of us at the same time, looking at the same information. Then with Web 2, we went beyond just looking at information on the internet to actually building websites and businesses and doing commerce on the internet. What happened with Web 2, which is the internet that we're currently using, is that corporations and businesses, of course, were way more able to take advantage of this new functionality than we as individual people were. Like, we were not necessarily, all of us, setting up our own website and running a business through the internet. Certainly not a business the size of some of the large businesses that run the big social networks and e-commerce that we see today. And so with that transition from Web 1 to Web 2, we had a significant asymmetry set up, an asymmetry of information, an asymmetry of knowledge, and an asymmetry of capital production and capital distribution. And what Web 3 is this blockchain-based model or ethos that says we're no longer technologically constrained into Web 2. We can move beyond Web 2 to a Web 3 that looks a lot more like Web 1, that allows each of us to participate, yes, as our own digital entities on the internet, where we can become individual data companies ourselves, where we can manage, control, generate, and consume our own data, but also make that available to each other, as well as to industry at large, for purposes that we approve of. And this is something that wouldn't be possible with Web 2. It's too much of a technical ask to ask people to look after their information in the old model, but using blockchain, smart contracts, and NFTs, we're in a place where it can be possible as a small technical ask to ask people to look after their own information. And then by doing so, we don't just have large corporations generating our gross domestic product. We have then moved into a place where individuals themselves are individual data businesses, and then the amount of high quality raw material to train AI on would increase dramatically. The number of transactions would increase dramatically. You and I today may have bought a coffee, perhaps purchased something online, but the number of transactions are there are a handful of transactions. Imagine a future where you could have pre-approved a lot of your health data stream to be used for purposes that are all executed by software. And that during this podcast, you and I might have had a couple of hundred transactions take place. And so we recognize and appreciate that the health industry and other industries have taught us how valuable data is, and that this is something that recently only large corporations could build and garner value for themselves. But with Web3 and blockchain-based solutions, we're suggesting that now we can start talking about mass participation in creating a wealth of knowledge. And clearly, knowledge is the basis of new wealth. So we can all participate in creating new knowledge, new wealth, and then benefit from transacting in that new wealth creation ourselves. Hope that wasn't too long. Let's move quickly. Right.
Sure. No, that sounds great. That was great. Thank you.
So then we talk about a future with data unions, where we would participate in a data union of sorts, because that's the other thing that's beautiful about this new technology, is the ability to set up corporations, unions, businesses, basically off the shelf. You don't need bricks and mortar. You don't need office chairs, desks, and other things. And you can even take governance models off the shelf and build them in at the same time. These are things we're just learning about at the moment, but they provide us a scaffolding by which we can say, let's work together to solve a particular problem. Your previous guest was talking about rare and undiagnosed individuals, rare disease and undiagnosed individuals. So they would be a good example of a typical sort of, in this healthcare model, a patient group that might want to collaborate with understanding what types of healthcare exposures have you had versus myself, and so on and so forth.
How do you think the large companies like Google, Facebook, how will they react to the people trying to form data unions? What do you think they'll try to do? Do you think they'll work with people to,
Well, I think that,
this?
yeah, I think the general sort of assumption is that this is somehow negative for the big players. But I think that the big players are sophisticated enough to understand the value of better, richer data down the road. And certainly in terms of healthcare is constantly struggling with ransom attacks and data breaches that are very disruptive to their business model. And if there was a safe and effective way in which they could be assured that anytime Ray shows up for healthcare visit of some sort, he's going to have high quality medical grade data coming with him, then I think that's something they would be willing to offload if at all possible. And then, like I said, this idea of not cutting into each other's pie, but really building the size of that pie on the back of the population, that, these thinking of the citizenry not as necessarily just people that you serve, but really as the workforce that is behind creating the intelligence by which the entire industry can operate, sounds like a much better option in the future. And hopefully this is the way they see it too, and want to pull up their sleeves and participate in a future where we, the individuals, can be relied on to manage our own medical grade longitudinal health records. And that puts us in a position to co-produce a corpus of health intelligence that is vastly superior to what we're working from today.
Right. And I wonder if we'll come to a point where the aggregation of all that data will be valuable enough for people to sort of live off of their data, meaning like they'll generate enough value, some sort of money that they can use to pay for their bills or pay for food and shelter and things like that. I mean, it's possible in my view, and I think that's sort of where this is going. But of course, and I think in your book, you kind of describe this as well, but I'll let you continue and share what you think.
Yeah, so I'm as optimistic as you are. I hope that, the billions that are currently being generated by industry, on kind of the back end of your visit. You have a visit, and then using HIPAA, we remove your name and other identifiers and then resell that information on a regular basis in the hopes of, or in the guise of suggesting we're going to have scientific insight by doing so. But at the end of the day, we've really created data quality because it's only episodic visits and there's, not guaranteed identity associated with those episodic visits. That quality of data is great for marketing. It's not great for scientific insight. And hopefully what we see moving in the future is that this data stream, once the individual is in control, we'll be speaking a little less about aggregating it. We're not creating new honeypots of data with this data union, but we have this distributed model by which AI can now work on a much more sophisticated, high quality information that spans your entire health experience. Because remember, your visits are just these tiny episodes that do not make up your health at the end of the day. You can't back engineer health from hospital or clinic visits. And so this model moving forward of very high quality AI training data at the, authorized by individuals who are participating is a model that not only creates more intelligence, but I think it's going to solve our engagement problem as well. We keep talking about individuals, being poorly engaged in their health. Well, asking somebody to track their steps is really hard to say that that's valuable to them for any length of time. We have all these devices and wearables and apps that make it easier for us to digitize our physical health expression. But just having our own data reflected back at us, which is where we're currently at, we're at the early part of this curve. Seeing your own sleep data or your own step data shown to you day after day after day becomes very difficult to engage folks with that for long term. But imagine if you were able to not just see your own sleep data, but see how your sleep data relates to individuals similar to yourself throughout the globe, and that there's a bunch of other parameters that will make your sleep data more valuable on the open market. Maybe you want to be doing your steps specifically because your sleep data is worth more when it's associated with your step data, or that your laboratory data is worth more on the open market because it has both sleep and step data associated with it. Then you have economic reasons for people to participate in apps and wearables and track their health in the context of other people's health for reasons that are beyond just, oh, do this because it's good for you.
Right. I think that's not a motivator, really. Oh, this is good for you, you should do it. Yeah. It doesn't work for most people. They kind of need to, economically see the value, as well as maybe have some changes in that experience, because it's very static, like you mentioned, sort of.
Right. And so imagine being able to not just see your own sleep reflected back at you, but you see the sleep of a few 100,000 people that are similar to you, find out where you are in the curve, find out what are the components that allow you to shift to optimal instead of just average amongst these hundreds of thousands. And that those, high fidelity directions with respect to how to improve your sleep, you can look at 60 or 70 of them and pick the 10 or 12 that you think you can do or you're willing to do. And so that your sleep data gives you a high fidelity understanding of why you are where you are in terms of what's possible or what's reachable for a person of your age in your location at this time in your life, but also be able to project out for you what your sleep's going to look like when you're 50 or 70 or 80 based on what you're doing now. And so I think those types of predictions and assessments are totally possible using machine learning and AI. You're not going to get any of that from a physician. We can't manage 600, a couple thousand attributes in our head ever at any time. And so we do want to be in a world where we're creating a digital representation of our physical health or our physical health experience in such a way that we can gain the most insight for ourselves moving forward. And like I said, it's all optional. You don't have to do it, but you can choose to do it, A, to improve your own health, B, to help others understand their health, and C, to create an economic asset for yourself that may at some point generate enough economic benefit that we might be able to talk about a universal basic income.
Good point. And you can even imagine sharing that data with the next generation, like your children, and that'll become part of like the family vault of data, presuming that we still, will be able to own our data in the future, right? This is one of the key questions of our day is, are we going to be owning our own data, or is this going to be, are we still going to be the product in this ecosystem? Very important question. And I hope we get to own the data. And I think you do too.
I do, absolutely. And I hope that industry understands too, that it's better for us to own the data.
Yes. And better for them too. It's less liability as well. There's a lot of good reasons why individuals should own their own data and have the option of delegating the ownership of their data still, because some people naturally won't be able to manage it, but they should have some way of allowing someone to manage it like they do today.
Exactly. Super.
Awesome.
So just talking about where this is happening now in fintech, of course, we've got some great opportunity for other industries to teach us in health how things should be done. Because of course, with health and health expression, the threshold for safety is a little narrower. So we don't want to be doing too much in a place where the safety profile might be not optimal. And therefore, watching fintech and others sort this out for us is, I think, an awesome way to go. So fintech, of course, we have nothing but all these experiments around all these different altcoins. We have all these experiments around different types of DAOs and different types of groups. Supply chain is a very big use of, makes perfect sense to have a supply chain that is managed through a blockchain-based solution, because you want to be able to know exactly where everything was at what time, in what condition, and handled by whom or interfered with by whom, so that you can be confident with respect to what the end product is. So very important for pharmaceuticals, for nutritional elements, etc. And then even I have a wine to remind me that I think it's the Australian government is tokenizing every bottle of wine because they find that this is the only way to get their liquor taxes from selling liquors. And so if you tokenize each and every item, then you can have an opportunity to do a much better job of, the financial remuneration of taxation on that item is enabled through this technology as well. And then most people don't really think of cannabis. Cannabis is an interesting place because here individuals are using, CBD products for health reasons, anxiety, sleep, pain management, and so on. But we can't rely on the pharmaceutical industry to teach us what works for whom at what time, because this is a natural product. It doesn't have intellectual property associated with it to the same degree that pharmaceutical companies that you're interviewing all the time, they expect there to be a lockdown IP behind their millions that they want to invest in this molecule or other.
It's all about the IP for pharma and biotech. That's there. Without, those patents, it's hard to evaluate them. Yeah.
So we're left in a world where the users of CBD products, THC products, they rely on each other to create the intelligence by which they can then make, experience-informed decisions with respect to what it is they want to buy. And so one of the examples in the book is the Chroma Exchange, which works specifically with cannabis producers and businesses and individual users to co-create intelligence across the entire ecosystem. Because of the regulations in place, we already know the sort of kind of seed to sale piece of the puzzle, and the seed is characterized to the DNA level. So we have DNA fingerprints of different seeds, and then we can just match that up with individual user characteristics and their experience with that product. That's fed back into the ecosystem so that the rest of the population basically does not allow our health experiences to go to waste. They don't just, they digitize them. They answer the surveys so that, and they use the devices and the wearables to track their heart rate and other parameters while using these products so that we can co-create the intelligence such that future customers of these products can purchase the right things for the right reasons and expect the right outcomes.
I like the way you say co-create this intelligence, co-produce, co-create. This is kind of what the future looks like, potentially, right?
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that I saw in your book, there was a section on evidence-based medicine versus experience-based health. Can you talk to me a bit more about that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. And this is a good place to talk about it because, as you mentioned, pharma, the entire business model is based on IP or intellectual property. And so they can spend millions of dollars that are associated with randomized controlled trials where you stop everything from moving, but only one thing gets to move so that you can decide whether your molecule has an effect or not. And that's what we call, evidence-based medicine. And the problem, of course, with evidence-based medicine, as we just said, it's millions of dollars. It's very expensive. It's very slow.
And it's not like real life in many cases. It's a very
it's not
controlled environment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not transferable because we just said we stopped all variables from moving. No one lives like that. Not one of us lives for any moment in any day where all variables have stopped moving. In our lives, every variable is moving at all times. And so it's not very transferable information. And fundamentally, of course, it leaves out all these different populations. Can't do it in old people, can't do it in kids, can't do it in pregnancy, and so on and so forth. So with the experience-based evidence model, we're saying, okay, experience is happening out there. Let's not let it go to waste. We know it's not a randomized controlled trial. We know that the confidence intervals are going to be different. But at the end of the day, if there is enough experience out there, the AI can start to sort out what looks to be potentially causal, what looks to be highly correlated, what looks to be very effective or not. And that puts us in a place where we're now relying on individuals, as I said, not to allow their experience to just evaporate, digitize it and keep that experience, because the beauty of computers, of course, is they never forget. They won't forget any of those experiences. And so rather than being a newcomer and walking into a store and asking for a product, not knowing what it'll be, imagine always being able to check with your phone to throw in some parameters, 20, 30 parameters about yourself, and have your phone let you know whether or not this product is likely to be useful for you or not. And that it would be based on, hundreds of thousands of live bodies, individual experiences of the past. And that's the beauty of blockchain and, verified credentials, is that we can use that technology to help ensure that almost everything that's being validated and considered in terms of coming up with recommendations, that these are real events, that this is a real product whose seed, the DNA of the seed was fingerprinted, and it happened in a real individual, and this was their real questionnaire that they answered in a real way. So that's the piece of the Web3 that makes it very different from previous technology.
Absolutely. And I think about, not only medicines and, cannabis, but there's also supplements. That's a huge industry that we still, I'm sure half of the products out there might not even be effective at all for most people. Some are effective, some might be even dangerous. So knowing that, how that applies in the real world would also be, I think, very interesting to me personally, but I think in general to the whole science-based leaders out there. I think everyone wants to know that as well.
And yeah, and exactly what you said. We don't have time to figure this out by ourselves.
Right.
If somebody has taken this product before and used it, let me know how it worked for you. Especially if natural products and nutraceuticals, if they're going to work better and have less side effects, then stop keeping them in the nutraceutical lane. If there's 100,000 people that have used it and all agree that this does wonders for, let's use sleep again, just to be consistent. Let that exposure of the truth surface. And that's what I think we, the people, can do in ways that industry cannot.
I'm with you.
Okay. Anyway, and then in terms of speaking about different ways in which this takes place, NFTs, of course, non-fungible tokens are a type of token. And I put my book, which people recognize and understand as, this is a book I can hold in my hand or read it online in my Kindle, etc. That's what it looks like on the right. But we let AI come up with a different cover for the NFT and talk a little bit about how this is different from the traditional product. So this is an NFT that'll be minted when somebody buys an NFT, and then it becomes available in a distributed network such that it can never really die. My books can be burnt or they can be destroyed in some way and fall off the planet, never to be found again. Whereas as long as the internet survives, the NFT version of that book will always be available. And so you're seeing this movement of how Web3 creates more wealth, and people are using NFTs for music, for art, for books, for all sorts of things. And this is some data that was provided at Consensus last week in Austin. I don't have a reference for it, though. The speaker suggested that NFTs just last year had returned already 47 he said billion. I'm going, that sounds pretty big. To creators, whereas Spotify, 7 billion. So the traditional Web2 model, much lower return. If these numbers are at all correct, at least they're helping us understand how by tokenizing or turning something into an NFT, you start to have the ability to create more value. You have a piece of real estate, for instance, or a building, you convert it to a token. Now you have much higher liquidity. You have the ability for fractional ownership, and you have, just a whole sort of host of properties emerge by digitizing these assets that aren't available in the traditional model. And so these are examples of how we expect this technology to increase the wealth on the planet and increase the wealth for everybody on the planet.
So given all the potential and opportunity here with Web3, NFTs, maybe even DAOs as well, decentralized autonomous organizations and your governance models, what are the major hurdles for Web3 adoption that a lot of people you talk to are faced with?
So I think the first hurdle, of course, what we started this conversation around, is that it's just too hard to wrap around too hard an idea to wrap your head around if you're not conversant in the vocabulary or have seen any of this in operation in your day-to-day experience. And so that's the reason behind the book. And that's the reason why I think hopefully there's enough incentive in this effort to get people to want to read more, to want to start listening to more podcasts, to pick up an opportunity to, take a course or participate in some way to learn more about this. So that is an early obstacle. The other obstacle we talked about as well too, which is, this current Web 2 model is making a lot of money for a lot of people. So why should they change? And hopefully it's, again, we're able to show them the money to say change, and then you will be happier at the end of the day.
So it's one is lack of education on Web3, and the other is the incumbents of Web 2 sort of don't want to let go just yet.
Right.
And yeah.
And the third one I would say is it's still early days. So even though I say things are easy, they're not that easy. They're, owning a wallet. So for instance, for creating this book, I went as an NFT, I went to Alexandria Labs. They are the technology provider of a platform that turns books into NFTs and creates NFT libraries. I did have to create a MetaMask wallet, and I needed some hand-holding from the CEO and others on the team to make that happen. And then, so it's not, how should I put it? What's the word for
foolproof? It's not foolproof.
Yeah, it's not foolproof, and it's not self-serve yet. So I think that where we're seeing the biggest movement, of course, is more and more solutions are becoming way more self-serve than they were previously. You used to have to have somebody else custody everything for you because you couldn't figure it out yourself. And it was just this kind of collective of tech geeks that really understood Web3, loved it, created all the crypto experiments, and are still in there building the metaverse, and we'll never get them out again, right? And so I think we got to get to this place where the whole world understands that this is not for nerds, it's for us as individuals, and that we're all having health expressions and health experiences every day. These things are incredibly valuable, not just to ourselves, but to the rest of the world, and that the technology is making it easy for us to digitize those health experiences. And once we digitize those health experiences, then we can participate in these data economies that, as we say, may become universal basic income, perhaps for ourselves, if not for future generations. Because just like this NFT that you're looking at here, the royalties on follow-on sales always accrue to my account in perpetuity. So my children and my children's children and so on and so forth, assuming anybody would even want to read this thing because it's going to be so out of date in like 5 years.
Fair enough, yeah.
Or 5 months, right? The way
the tech is moving very fast. That's true. Yeah. And I could see why, things can get outdated really quickly. I have a question about your experience with the Near Foundation grant? So I understand that you received a grant from the Near Foundation. Could you just talk about your experience with them?
Oh, yeah, they're awesome. So the Near Foundation has what's called a public goods grant. And on looking at the application form, it seemed to be designed for open source software and products such as that. But I answered the questions suggesting I wasn't going to create software, but I was going to create this book thing. And the book is something that the rest of the world understands, and that it would be a public good in that it would serve this purpose to provide a common narrative for diverse stakeholders to collaborate on our preferred futures. And yeah, the Near Foundation was great. They helped with 50% of the publishing costs, and they, didn't have any requirements on my side. Like I didn't have to put a whole page devoted to Near Foundation in the book or anything like that. So it's pretty hard to find them as a quote sponsor, but they're awesome and very effective to help with the publishing costs. And
that's awesome. And like you said earlier, like education is one of the main important things needed so that we can, see more adoption. So I think a lot of blockchain Web3 organizations are very happy to provide some, resources so that people can educate the masses in different ways. In one example, like your book, right? Wealthcare. Brigitte, thank you so much for this conversation and your time. Is there anything else you wanted to share with the audience or with me that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet?
Well, I think just one point that I don't think we spoke about yet is kind of this levelizing effect that this model does not do more for people with more health or people with less health. So if we're joined together in a pursuit of ground truths, we need both the horrible health, the medium health, the awesome health, expressions. All of them matter in terms of serving up what's actually true at the end of the day for whom. And so I think that's another kind of big important message here, is that your health is valuable regardless of how you rate your health, and it's valuable to you and to others. And so I see this as a wonderful way of kind of levelizing all of us again, in terms of the fact that we're breathing in and out. That means we are an amazing value creator in terms of understanding what the ground truths are together.
I appreciate that very much. And I think, with Web3, hopefully health equality, health equity, we'll see a lot of progress in the right direction with those in those topics. Thanks again. I really appreciate your time and looking forward to sharing this with everyone. And if you are listening or watching this, please like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions or would like to reach out to our guest as well.
Thanks. And I put a couple of links at the bottom in case people need to get a hold of me. Really hoping that we all see the same vision, that our preferred tomorrow is Web3, that rugged individualism is a myth. We're in this together, and we'll have way more together than we can have alone.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Piniewski.
Talk soon. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.